Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com and WeissAdvice here on YouTube. In this video, I want to talk about parallel processing. However, I want to talk about parallel processing in a less than typical sense. Normally, when we see videos on parallel processing, it either involves parallel compression or some parallel distortion techniques, or even maybe some parallel EQ using EQ and distortion to kind of create like an exciter. I have a couple of videos on that myself. This is not going to be that. If you want to see any videos on that kind of stuff, comment in the comment section below. I'll make some videos, but in this video, I want to talk about parallel processing as an emotional and creative tool and kind of taking things in a slightly different direction. So I'm going to play down some of this vocal without any parallel processing, and then I'm going to show you 4 parallel returns that I've created and what they do and why they're kind of neat, and also a little philosophy tied in with them. Okay, so first of all, let's play this vocal down.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita. Esos besos tuyos, mis labios los necesitan. Eres mi muñeca, mi muñequita.
So this is Lennox from Zion and Lennox. I'm going to solo the vocal up. I'm going to take off my processing real quick just to kind of show where we started.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena.
And then where we ended up with just conventional processing.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita.
So much smoother, much more balanced, a lot weightier, and a lot more consistent. So good typical processing. Now, before doing a lot of parallel processing, I like to get my sounds to kind of be in this sort of vein where things sound good. Maybe they don't sound special yet, but they sound good. And this applies to kind of anything, whether it's a snare, a kick, synths, anything like that. I kind of want to fit them into the right place before I start dressing them up with special effects. Now, let's talk about the special effects. Usually when we're doing some kind of parallel processing, like parallel compression, a lot of the times it's for the purpose of making something fuller or giving something more presence within the mix. So the first one that I've got here, this parallel full, is going to be exactly that. And it's a very typical parallel compression setup for vocals, followed by a little tiny bit of a twist, but not really going outside of the realm of what we expect from typical parallel compression here. I'll go through this one at a time, and I've got this on pre-fader so we can hear just the isolated return, and I'll sort of show you what everything's doing. So we're going to start with this CLA 76.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita.
So you can hear that it's a lot like the vocal, it's just very, very tense sounding, right? It feels like it's being put under a lot of pressure. This is without it at all.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena.
With.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre.
So it almost brick walls the vocal. Now here's where things get a little bit fun, and I put a little twist on it. Now that everything is kind of sitting on like one dynamic plane, now I'm going to use a second compressor to actually create a consistent rhythm. And for this, I tend to like the CLA 3A. I like the swing this has on up-tempo vocals. And so that swing is going to become a natural dynamic of the vocal going after this CLA 76. So it's a slight variation on parallel compression. Let's check it out. Before.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita. Esos besos tuyos, mis labios los necesitan.
Now with the CLA 3A.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita. Esos besos tuyos, mis labios los necesitan.
So it's very, very similar. It's just giving it a slight different bit of edge and flow. It's actually giving it a little bit of dynamic back in a very rounded way. And then lastly, I'm going to add a little bit of top end to this parallel return. It got a little husky, a little bit of like the kind of more piercing range around 4K-ish kind of came up a little bit, so I'm going to sort of smooth that out and brighten things up.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita.
Now, this is very straightforward. It's a little bit of a twist on a typical parallel compression setup, but really, this is something that you would hear very typically in like a pop record. It's going to give us a very clean, clear, and compressed version of the vocal. If we were to hear it in the context of the track, it would sound something like this.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita. Esos besos tuyos, mis labios los necesitan. Eres mi muñeca, mi muñequita.
And what you notice is that even though it sounds a little overly compressed, it actually feels kind of good in the track. And this is where the philosophy starts to come in now with parallel processing. Parallel processing, the real benefit to parallel processing is that we can do something that feels good but doesn't necessarily sound good, and then get that energy by using a blend of something that sounds good. So while this, I would say, is overly compressed for this vocal, if we were to then scale it back with the original vocal, we would get something that sounds pretty darn good. So I'm going to make a blend of these two right here.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita. Esos besos tuyos, mis labios los necesitan. Eres mi muñeca.
And I like this for the groove of it. I like the swing that I'm getting from the vocal. It's giving me a fullness, but it's also giving me a swing. So this works really well when you want to go in sort of a more popish kind of direction, a cleaner, clearer representation of what you're going, but still have a bit of effect to it. Now I'm going to go on to something that's a little bit more affected. This is going to be my husky vocal, and this is designed to make the vocal feel very, very weighty. So let's solo this up real quick.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita. Esos besos tuyos, mis labios los necesitan.
So let's go over what's making this work. Let's hear it without any of the processing real quick.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena.
Okay, the first thing I'm using is this L-Ray compressor, and the reason I'm using this is because it has the ability to kind of make things feel very heavy. It kind of energizes the low mid a little bit, and then also the roundness of the attack and release kind of makes it feel like it's constantly under pressure and sort of always running out the top end a little. And it also has this sidechain filter, so if I put this into the vocal range, the sidechain filter, taking out the lowest part of the vocal, it's also going to react a little bit more strongly to the upper mid. So all of these things are going to contribute to a heavier sound without necessarily changing the tone curve exactly. So here's without, then with.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena.
Let's level match that a little bit better. I'm going to take this down just a hair.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda. Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena.
Yeah, so even level matched, you still hear that a certain energy starts to show up around like 300, 400 hertz. It starts to kind of lean in that direction a little bit.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena.
Now, we can also note that this is also parallel compression, but I'm doing it now for a very completely different purpose. Our next step is going to be tape saturation, and this is going to start to really run off the highs, and it's going to start to saturate in the lows.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita. Esos besos tuyos, mis labios los necesitan. Eres mi muñeca, mi muñequita.
Now, I think that sounds good, but I think that we're still kind of in the same realm as what we were doing the first time. Yes, we're transforming it a little bit, but no, we're not transforming it all that much. So the very last step is going to be this, where I'm going to put a second layer of tape-like saturation, but this is more like VHS tape saturation, so it's a lot huskier sounding, and that's going to give us a kind of heavier vibe.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte.
Also, I'm automating the reverb that's built into it up and down, which kind of helps to punctuate the cadences, which I think is kind of cool. But even if we're just listening to the huskiness of the vocal,
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte.
so it kind of makes the whole vocal sound like it's like under a bit of a fog or a mist. If I bring this into the track, it sounds like this.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita. Esos besos tuyos, mis labios los necesitan.
So same idea, but this time it sounds too dark for the track. It still feels good, right? There's a certain something about that heaviness that feels nice. It's just without the openness of the top end of the original vocal, it feels like it's a little bit too dull. So again, we take advantage of the fact that it's in parallel and we get a blend of the two.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita. Esos besos tuyos, mis labios los necesitan.
And I particularly like this approach for this particular record. When it comes to Mafio's production, he has a sort of earthiness in his sound that I really like, and I kind of like to lean into it, and I think that this husky feeling that we're giving the vocal kind of leans into that earthiness. So I like that for this. Now let's go a little bit further here, and let's take a look at, like, going above and beyond. So here I'm going to use this parallel exciting track. This is where I start to just really indulge in effects and EQ. I'm going to start a little bit tame here. Not tame, but like here we've got a pretty strong lift in the top end. We're going to do complete 100% saturation, very little compression, but a little distortion, delay, reverb, all that stuff coming together to make one fun sound.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita.
So now I'm going to bring that into the track.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría.
So now I'm going to bring that into the track.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita. Esos besos tuyos, mis labios los.
So this one's interesting because I think as is, I don't even really hate it. Like, yes, it sounds a little strident, but it kind of is like a fun sound. I would be tempted to even like consider voicing this as the lead, even though it is pretty clearly effecty sounding and not in like the way of just like traditional reverb and delay. It's definitely not natural sounding though, but it sounds really cool. Now we can go further and we can start piling on different kinds of effects. So one of the effects that I like to play with on vocals is this kaleidoscope thing.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita. Esos besos tuyos, mis labios los necesitan. Eres mi muñeca, mi muñequita. Tu flow me fascina.
And now we're really getting into the realm of things that sound cool but definitely don't sound right. So that's one possibility. Another possibility is like these very, very weird, awkward reverbs, like this one.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita. Esos besos tuyos, mis labios los necesitan.
So it's like a really weird reverb delay thing. Totally doesn't work when it's loud, but all of this stuff will work when it's blended in parallel. So that's where we start trying this stuff. So maybe let's do it with the weird reverb, and actually let's just do it with the nectar by itself.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre.
Let's get a kind of closer blend, actually. Let's take the leads down by 3, and let's take the nectar up by 3.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita. Esos besos tuyos, mis labios los necesitan. Eres mi muñeca.
So it sounds really good, but now let's add some weird effects to it.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita. Esos besos tuyos, mis labios los necesitan. Eres mi muñeca, mi muñequita. Tu flow me fascina porque nunca te quitas. A cualquiera matas con tu cinturita. Siempre te esperaré porque tú eres mi mamá.
So it's a totally weird sound, but once we blend it in with the natural sound, it just sounds affected in a cool way. Let's do one more. Let's go really, really out there. Let's use some convolutions and some reverbs and make something that's totally, totally weird. So this is a totally bizarre sound, right? Let's hear it in the context of the mix. So I think this is like the ultimate example of that. To me, as a color, like if this was an instrument, that would sound awesome. But because it's the vocal, it sounds terrible. But it feels great, right? It's this weird, chorusy, flangey, bizarre thing. Basically, it's a delay feeding into the convolution of a radio, feeding into that same reverb thing that I was using a second ago, little EQ to kind of dress it up, and then into this super VHS again, giving it that huskiness, but also using this chorus effect as well. And it's got that reverb automation too on top of it. So this is like totally bizarre nutso effect kind of a thing, and it sounds really, really cool. Now let's bring it in parallel with the lead vocal.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita. Esos besos tuyos, mis labios los necesitan. Eres mi muñeca, Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita.
So it sounds really cool. Again, I think maybe the reverb is a little too much. I'm going to turn that down ever so slightly. And it's not giving us, this is not really like a parallel compression thing, so it's not giving us the fullness that some of the other ones are giving us. But let's put in maybe a little bit of the husky vocal, and maybe not quite as much of it, just to kind of give us that body, and then have this combination of the three.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita. Esos besos tuyos, mis labios los necesitan. Eres mi muñeca, mi muñequita. Tu flow me...
And actually, we can go totally crazy, and we can use maybe a little bit of the husky vocal. So we're going to turn it down a little bit more, and a little bit of the fuller vocal, and get a combination of all of them.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita. Esos besos tuyos, mis labios los necesitan. Eres mi muñeca, mi muñequita. Tu flow me fascina porque nunca te...
Because once we create these fun little... Wait, why did that not go? There we go.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita. Esos besos tuyos, mis labios los necesitan.
That actually sounds pretty cool. Yeah, I'm going to play it down one more time in a second, but basically the idea here is once we've created these good-feeling parallel returns, we can also create a blend of them. Like, we can be creative with it. There isn't necessarily rules. Now, a lot of the times blending multiple of these parallel things that are created for different purposes, it doesn't always work so well together, but I think this one's actually going to work pretty well. Let's play it down and then we'll wrap up the video.
Ven donde mí,
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita. Esos besos tuyos, mis labios los necesitan. Eres mi muñeca, mi muñequita. Tu flow me fascina porque nunca te quitas. A cualquiera mandas con tu cinturita. Siempre te esperaré porque tú eres mi mamacita. Ven donde mi, vente mami. Ven donde mi, vente mami, que estoy pa' ti. Ven donde mi, vente mami. Vente mami.
Ven donde mí.
Por tus ojos de miel y tu piel de seda, yo daría lo que fuera, nena. Quiero tenerte siempre cerquita. Esos besos tuyos, mis labios los necesitan. Eres mi muñeca, mi muñequita. Tu flow me fascina porque nunca te quitas. A cualquiera mandas con tu cinturita.
Cool. I like it. All right, let's wrap up here. If you dig this video, hit that like button. If you want to catch more videos like this, hit subscribe with the bell notification. Following the theme of this week, this is not something where there's like specific outline techniques. This is more like development and learning and experimentation. And if that's the kind of thing that you're into, I suggest joining WeissAdvice as a member. The link will be in the description below because that will give you the chance to join the Discord and also participate in the weekly webinars. Right now we're running them bi-weekly, actually, and those are chances to kind of take an hour or two out of the day to show this stuff in real time and the real thought process and experiment with things and find things that we like in a back and forth kind of way, because you would be able to join in, ask questions, etc. Okay, lastly, you know what we say here at WeissAdvice. We are musicians, sound is our instrument, and I will catch you next time.